Thank you so much for joining us today, talking on our August State of the Union. We start off as usual with our caging results. There was a decline in our July caging data, about 12% in revenues. Number of gifts was the culprit here, as average gift was pretty much flat. This is just mail donations since it's from our response management folks. Goes across 171 organizations, 11 sectors. 2 had growth over this time that we saw. One was regional hospitals and the other was animal rescue. We're looking into why this would be. Some of it is the potential for a timing difference. And then with hospitals, there may have been a bit of a timing difference last year that depressed July 2020 results. July 2022 results. Rather than a huge jump up in 2023 results. The largest decreases that we saw were among domestic hunger charities with the most significant drop. So, any questions on the caging results? Then many of you may have seen our MORE report at the Bridge Conference or from our emails about it. We've been talking for a couple of months on these calls about, yes, we'll be getting out benchmarking data, and we did finally get it out in time for the Bridge Conference. So we have 2022, this is just mail results. We're working on trying to go a little bit more omni-channel for future years, but wanted to get out what we had for 2022 while it was still, while folks were still asking about it. Overall mail revenue was down about 10%, despite an average gift uptick in a little bit over 6%. Total gifts were our culprit there, down 15.5%. So there was this drop in total gifts, increase in average gifts. And so we go through in the report a couple of reasons that there can be this average gift increase. Part of it is people actually increasing their average gifts, but there are a couple of things that could have caused. And we've talked about that in the context of as inflation goes up, as the cost of everything else goes up, as it did in 2022, people perceive that the cost of charity, so to speak, would go up in correspondingly. So that's the first reason people may be consciously choosing those. However, we do see that there was a drop in small dollar donors versus large dollar donors, a shifting in that. And so when there's this inflationary period, people who are in a fixed income state are hit the hardest by that. That's part of why previous economic downturns hadn't hurt as much. You know, if you're on a fixed income, your income's the same, but when inflation spikes, it's like you're getting paid less on those fixed incomes. And so there was a drop, especially among smaller dollar donors. And so because of that, the average gift goes up, not because there's a larger number of larger dollar donors, but there's a larger decrease among smaller dollar donors, changing in essence the composition of donor files. And then the third one is reinforcing that we did see, as folks cut back in mail volumes in 2022, we did see a bit of a drop there. The people that you would cut out first are the people who are likely to make the smallest gifts. And so average gift could go up because of the composition of the file of the people that you're mailing. We do say in the report, you see overall, why did results go down? Well, we saw COVID bubble deflating. We've been talking about that for a while, but generally speaking, when there's huge increases one year, there's generally significantly less impressive follow-up years and a lot of follow-up years that are dropping. In essence, they're kind of pulling 2023 gifts into 2022. We do have sector by sector results. And we go through these in much greater detail in the report, going through each sector, going through what average gifts were, what response rates were, and then breaking out acquisition versus renewal. And then overall, I should have mentioned this initially, but if you do want to get further details on the report or download, it's available on the MORE white papers page. So that's wearemore.com/white-papers, I believe. You can also go to wearemore.com and just select education white papers. Either will get you there. this is the top of the list for right now. So we did see a couple of groups where average gift did decline, but the overall was a significant increase. Breaking it down by type of mailing, we saw, as many organizations did, so we saw across organizations, many organizations saw this individually, that there was a substantial shift, that acquisition mailing was hit the hardest. Largest drop in the amount mailed, largest drop in revenue, largest drop in response rate, largest drop in revenue per piece, and the lowest increase in average gift to offset that. And so when you're looking at these mailing types, it's bringing new people into the organization and then renewing them also a little bit harder during that time. Those donors who were with the organization were more likely to stick with the organization and provide those revenues. So that all sounds rather not very good. We do know that a lot of organizations plan for that. The pulling back in donations, and in fact, that type of data-focused budgeting was one of the 5 things that organizations did. We saw that helped buck the trend of downward mail responses. That sort of, let's look at our file, let's look at the composition, let's see, okay, this bump that we're on won't last forever. But also, while our donor numbers look much larger, we also have this influx of 1- and 2-year donors who are less likely to donate, who are less likely to retain, and who are going to be making smaller gifts. Do you have any opinions about how that drop in acquisition response rates is affecting this year? Yes, we're going in with, generally speaking, slightly smaller files. And so there's going to be, and I call this the saggy mattress problem, where you have a strong group of core donors, you have sometimes acquisition results that are strong. 2023, not as strong on acquisition results and still need to trim that out. But then you have this dip in the middle where you have, because you didn't acquire as many donors in that cohort, that tends to move through the program and you can see the ripple effects from that. And so that drop in acquisition response rates from last year affecting file sizes for this year, affecting renewal rates from this year.
Thank you, because that's exactly what we're seeing. I mean, we've seen our renewal rates rebound from last year, but they haven't rebounded to the point that we expected them to when we did our budgets at the end of last year. So it's as you know, a complicated idea to have to explain to people who aren't in this world.
Yep. And one of the things that we got as a result of the Moore report, a few people came up to me or to Gretchen or to other Moore folks at Bridge and said, hey, this is good information that I would love for my board to hear, but ideally they would want to hear it best from an outside source. And so let me extend out the offer that if you want us to talk through this with your leadership, with your board, we have the slides, we have the data, and we're happy to go through it with whomever to help explain out what we saw in 2020, what the implications are for this year. We're trying to compile what it looks like in the first half of this year as well. I know from my time at MAD, sometimes it really helped for not necessarily a lay audience, but those who aren't in it every day, like many of us are, to hear from people that aren't in it every day for that organization can say, it's not just you, it's 150, 175, I forget exactly how many organizations, but it's all of these organizations across the sector. It's not your organization, it's macroeconomic, it's macro sector wide. The good news that goes into this is that you still have almost all of these sectors that are above, in fact, all of these sectors that are above 2019 levels, almost all that are above 2020 level sectors, but not everyone hears that well. Everyone, when things are going up and to the right, some folks will say, oh, I expect it to go up and to the right forever, when in reality it's bumps, it's fits and starts. Even the highest flying stock will have down days. Similar sort of thing here. Any other questions on the report? I'm biased. I helped write the thing, but I do recommend it to folks because there are some good case studies in there that say, here are organizations that were able to buck this trend in one part or many parts. And so as you're going in and presenting this, you can also say, and this is why I'm pitching you omni-channel investment. This is why I'm pitching you looking at response management vendors that will send out responses every day instead of every month. This is why I'm pitching rapid response operations, those sorts of things. There's overall data on talking about investing in data and going omni-channel and speed to market. But for those types of audiences, it's sometimes really helpful to say, here's Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Here's how they invested in data. They were able to double their number of major gift portfolio from just their direct mail program, and also improve their direct mail results by doing a deeper identification of potential mid and major donor from their file that goes beyond wealth screening. So some examples there. Okay. Some new developments in the rapidly evolving world of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Before I go into this next one, it's important to remember that 1 over 2 to the 6th is 1 to the 64th, which is about 1.5, 1.6%. And so, for example, if you were to flip a coin 6 times, you would expect it to come up heads about 1.6, all 6 occurrences 1.6% of the time, that it would come up tails 1.6% of the time. Why is that important? So Instiller looked at, can you spot an email written by a robot? And so asked people 6 times, is this a human or is this written by AI? And they framed it as 1 in 2 people can't spell, but the actual data in here is 1.2% of the time people were able to guess all 6 emails correctly. And so people did worse than random chance on what was a AI written email and what was a human written email. If you had the proverbial monkey throwing darts, coin flipping machine, whatever your analogy is that you wanted to have, they used ChatGPT for 3 emails. And this was a beauty brand. This is outside of the nonprofit sector. And they wrote 3 themselves. We're past the point of the Turing test where you blind out a machine learning system, and can people tell the difference? In fact, in this example, people were more likely to think that machine learning was human than the human was human. So it's a brave new world. Similarly, from ChatGPT, they asked 453 college-educated professionals and gave half of them access to ChatGPT and asked them for writing tasks. The time taken per task decreased by 40%, and output quality, as judged by outside observers, increased 18%. So we discussed last time around how ChatGPT and these types of tools are really good for lower skilled occupants. There was a great test of not telemarketers, but inbound telemarketing, inbound telephone-based customer service. The people who were the newest benefited most from a chatbot-like interface to help them along the way. If you had been there for a significant amount of times, it wasn't that much of a help. These are college-educated professionals doing writing tasks, and so presumably there has been a little bit of writing education in there, and there was still improvement in output. That said, inequality between workers decreased. That means that, like with the customer service folks, the people who would have performed the worst were the most helped. And so you do have not only that, but people who got to use ChatGPT during the test were more likely to say, I'm continuing to use it in my regular job. That is 60% more 2 months after the experiment they were willing to use it. So people able to use it. That said, there are still concerns about copyright infringement. The most famous lawsuit right now is with Sarah Silverman saying, look, Meta and OpenAI have both scraped on my copyrighted materials to use this. They are using my copyright. And so this is a concern with these sorts of models. There is a question, could we receive the Moore report digitally? Yes, absolutely, you can. That's available at wearemore.com/white-papers, or if you go to wearemore.com and select education white papers, it's the top one that's there, free to download. So PDF version right there. And I will say that we gave out, I think, over 300 more reports at Bridged, but we printed more. So if you need printed copies for the print enthusiasts in your life, just send us a note and we can probably get some out to you. So this is a concern with these sorts of materials, which is why it's interesting that, so Adobe is doing something that, or sorry, actually Adobe is doing something interesting. Adobe is working with Getty Images. They're licensing materials to be able to use for their Firefly, which is their branded generative solutions. That way you can say, look, if you're using Adobe Firefly, all of the images that they trained on, Adobe had permission to use. And so it gets around the copyright concern. Lisa, thank you so much for putting that in the chat. My apologies for not being Johnny on the spot with that. So thanks, Lisa. Similarly, OpenAI, the DALL-E system that they use, they've licensed Shutterstock's library and it's extending for 6 more years. So OpenAI is training on copyrighted materials, but they're all materials that they have a license to use for those purposes. I think we're going to see more and more of these deals as you go forward. We're doing this on a Zoom call. And so Zoom just changed its articles of its requirements for service. This is a non-opt-out thing in their terms of service, section 1004. And what they're saying now is Zoom has a right to use your data, including things like this call, in their product and service development. And you can see in section 2 here, in machine learning and artificial intelligence. So Zoom is now training on our data. And expect other tech providers to try to follow suit. So those terms of service that you sign actually are worth reading sometimes, believe it or not. Wanted to point people to There's an AI for That. It's a great tool. If you go to there'sanaIforthat.com, you can see all of these different tools, great opportunities. So if you want to incorporate YouTube video into a chatbot, there's an AI for that. There's significant brand safety implications for generative AI. One of the challenges is these news, and I'm using this term loosely, websites that are basically AI generated with little to no human oversight. The NewsGuard is tracking 217 of these sites. And one of the challenges is that these sites monetize with programmatic advertising. And so when you're doing programmatic advertising, you have to make sure that you keep updating those exclusion lists of random unsafe websites, that they count these generated websites. And so NewsGuard in May and June said that there were 141 major brands, for-profit and nonprofit, that were putting programmatic ads on these sites. And this is, those of you who remembered way back when we were talking about NewsGuard found that major nonprofits, including some health nonprofits, were advertising on sites with either election or COVID misinformation. AI as the creates the opportunity to take this to the next level because you now don't need a human to generate your misinformation. McKinsey did a report on generative AI, links below, but the most popular parts of organizations to be using generative AI tools are us over in marketing and sales. Fundraising is kind of the equivalent for the nonprofit sector. Manufacturing is on the far end of these cases, using it for text documents, creating first drafts, summaries, personalized marketing are the most popular ways of using it. However, not a lot of organizations have gone through and said, here are the risks of these types of adoptions. So all of the risks, copyright infringement, where we have lawsuits already going on right now, less than half of organizations say that's a relevant risk, even though it's happening. And only a quarter of organizations say they're working to mitigate that risk through these types of systems. So something to be talking about with organizations, and it's one that we're looking at very heavily. So if we can be of any help in this effort, please let us know. We'd love to hear what you're hearing. Is this a question that folks are getting? Is it something that you're worried about, your leadership is worried about, something that your leadership is excited about and want to further embrace? Or should I shut up about it on these calls? Okay. If you're feeling shy, feel free to shoot me a note at nellinger@wearemore.com. Let me know what you're hearing. If you don't mind, let me know what questions you're getting, and I will be happy to help you however and whenever I can. Onto the ever popular potpourri section. So Schwab Charitable Trust just put out a press release about their previous fiscal year. So their fiscal year is July to June. So information just came out. They had $5 billion coming out of their DAF grants. So that's an 8% increase year over year. 68% of donors are giving to new charities. However, new charities within the donor advised fund. So they may not be newer charities. We may be looking at them and saying, oh, that's an upgrade, as Schwab looks at that and says, oh, that's a new gift. The average donor is giving 12 gifts from their DAF per year. That said, 35% of grants were recurring, usually on a monthly basis. And so that's an easy way to get to 12 gifts. But it is interesting that there's an 8% increase in DAF giving overall, there's a 20% increase in monthly or recurring gifts from DAFs. And so that's a great area of opportunity. Most of the increase that they're seeing is in this type of recurring giving. And so the Sustainer program and the DAF program, the streams have crossed. The intersection of that Venn diagram is a very strong one. Area of opportunity.
Nick, do you know like what tool is being used that most people are using to increase their DAF giving? Because I know there are a couple out there, but like, is there one that's really helping to drive more DAF giving?
So yes, DAF giving isn't, I would say it isn't just online or isn't even mostly online. The organizations that we've seen successful in this are using a three-part system, I would say. The first part is better DAF identification. That's going beyond wealth screening and looking at indicators of whether someone actually has a DAF. Your modeler should be able to tap into this information. If you're in co-ops, they should have information on who's giving to organizations through other organizations through DAFs. So it's like if this person's giving to foreign organizations and 2 through their DAF, through 2 not through their DAF, there may be an opportunity for the 2 who aren't in that. But then there are also other indicators beyond just wealth that would indicate whether someone is likely to have a DAF. And so there's this opportunity, just like you would have for planned giving or sustainer giving or those sorts of things, where you're trying to model to say, this is a person likely to have a donor advised fund, and we want them to be giving through that. So better identification is part one. Part two is strategy. And here we're looking at an omni-channel strategy, just like you would in any other realm. The switch that we're trying to make in a large part for a lot of organizations, and I talk about it in my book, and I'll promote my book later on. But the idea is that instead of modeling the track and seeing what people fit into it, I want to get a mid-level giving model. Here are the people who are the best mid-level givers. We want to switch that around to be audience first, to say, here's this person, what track should they be on? And it's a subtle difference, but the challenge is that if you do separate modeling, your mid-level model and your major gift model and your DAF model and your sustaining gift model will all surface people who have a common thread of they are good donors. And so if you're going to each of those people separately, and let's say you go after tier 1 out of 10 of all of those, the people in tier 1 are going to be bombarded with all of these different asks. Whereas the people are in tier 2, who could be a good prospect in any one of these models, aren't being asked by any of them. So the analogy I use is, you look at baseball highlights, and there's always the play, or lowlights. There's always the play where fielders bump into each other and the ball falls between them. That's why baseball players call the ball and say, this one's mine. Similar sort of thing. You should be saying this person is the best track for them is a DAF program. So that type of identification is necessary. Once you're in that, doing an omni-channel approach to whatever that ask is going to be. So if they are best positioned for a DAF giving, that's putting a buck slip in the mail thing. That's making sure your CTV spots talk about donor advised fund giving. That's making sure that your online ads drive them to a DAF form and that sort of thing. And then the third part is the data on the back end. Working with your response management vendors, about 91% of donor advised fund gifts are attributable to an individual, making sure you're doing that attribution, making sure you are acknowledging the person rather than the fund. You're not just sending thank you notes to Schwab, you're sending it to the person who is actually appreciated, and talking to those folks about impact just like you would in other areas. And so that's the 3-track program that most successful organizations are giving. There are a lot of different plugins that you can use strictly for a digital purpose, but not gonna, I don't know enough to be able to say this one's better than that one to speak of. Any other DAF questions? I would recommend we do have a DAF webinar on our webinars page. So if you go to wearemore.com/webinars, it'll go and you'll be able to see a lot of different recommendations about donor advised fund giving. If that's a topic of interest, let me know and we can set up some more education about it for everyone. Or if it's something that you individually want to talk about, I can bring in our experts to talk with you about that. Another area worthy of its own model, although slightly less shiny of late, is cryptocurrency. And there was guidance from the Internal Revenue Service that just got released, or at least I just saw the memo. But they are classifying cryptocurrency as more like art or stock, or things that were not even stock, art or intangible items that need an instant valuation. And so the IRS is saying if you get more than $5,000 in cryptocurrency, you have to have a qualified appraiser do the work on that to document the donation. They are not treating it as a traded security that would have, even though there's public exchanges for it, they're saying that public exchange isn't a sufficient valuation. And so something to be aware of when you work with your legal and finance teams on accepting cryptocurrency donations. Wanted to highlight on August 23rd, if you go to that webinars page, you can sign up for our Power of Perspective webinar, looking at how you lead organizations through adversity and how you manage teams more effectively. We also have our Audience Right Message Right channel webinar on September 14th, looking across channels to be able to see, how do I develop new audiences? How do I develop personas that are relevant to people and not just wishful thinking? Also wanted to highlight TNPA has two summits coming up, Leadership Summit next month in DC, and then the month after that in October, we have the Rising Leaders Summit in New York City. I just got off a call promoting those. If that's something that you're interested in, please let me know, and I'm happy to get you in there. I also might have a promo code that can reduce your costs, so let me know, and I will try to hook you up. And then finally, personal promotion, very brief, but my new book is out, The Perfect Donor Communication, right up here. But talking about how you craft the perfect donor communication for each donor using artificial intelligence and intent and machine learning, because no one person can keep all of the variables necessary to do that straight in their head. So, and oh, thank you, Lisa. That's very kind. I appreciate it, and would love to see 5-star reviews or 1-star reviews. Would love to get the conversation going, because as you can tell, it's something that I believe in fairly strongly, and hope to be able to. One of the great things about generative AI is no one's an expert on it yet. Even the experts aren't experts on it. And so there are areas where, we are X number of years behind the for-profit sector. No one is more than 8 months behind on ChatGPT, because ChatGPT is 8 months old in terms of its wide release. And so there's a great opportunity for us to not only catch up to, but lead the communications out and really convince people that the best use of their money isn't a new widget, but changing or saving a life. So I'm remarkably bullish, with obvious caveats around all of the challenges that there are potentially in anything new that you would bring in, including wanting to make sure that we don't reify our own biases.